The energy connection between the EU and Russia has been significantly strained since the crisis in Ukraine began in February 2022. Previously, the EU relied on Russia for 40% of its gas, but sanctions and geopolitical tensions changed that balance. The EU accused Russia of weaponizing electricity, while Moscow attributed outages to sanctions and technical concerns. Key pipelines, such as Nord Stream 1, suffered severe cutbacks and eventually shut down, while Russia blocked shipments to nations that refused to pay in rubles, pushing many to seek alternatives. In response, the EU accelerated its diversification efforts, boosting imports of liquefied natural gas from the United States and Qatar, and investing in new infrastructure. These tensions generated extraordinary gas price increases in Europe, reaching over 300 euros per megawatt hour in 2022, boosting inflation and affecting consumers and enterprises. The tension has now escalated. European gas prices rise as Gazprom cuts off Austrian supplies. Before delving into the specifics of this news and its possible impact on the EU as a whole, consider the EU-Russia trade relationship throughout the years, notably in the run-up to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. The trading relationship between Russia and the European Union has changed dramatically since World War II, reflecting greater geopolitical developments and economic transformations. Following World War II, Europe was divided into two blocks, Eastern and Western, with the Soviet Union exercising influence in Eastern Europe. Trade between the Soviet Union and Western European nations was limited, owing to ideological disagreements and mutual distrust. However, many Western European countries, most notably Austria, began importing Soviet gas in the late 1960s. Austria became the first Western European country to buy Russian gas when the USSR inked a contract in 1968, only months before the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. The original agreement between Austria's OMV and the Soviet Union's Soyuz Nefte export was signed on June 1, 1968, marking a watershed moment in East-West economic ties during the Cold War. The contract was for an annual delivery of 142 million cubic meters of natural gas to Austria. Over the next 5 decades, the amount climbed more than 64 times, with Austria importing a record 9.1 billion cubic meters of Russian gas in 2017. Austria's geographical position permitted its role as a key transit point for Russian gas into Western Europe. The Baumgarten, a March gas hub on the Slovakian border, became an important site for exporting Russian gas to countries such as Germany, Italy, and France. This infrastructure not only guaranteed Austria's energy security, but also increased its economic relations with both Eastern and Western Europe. The 1968 Accord established a precedent for other Western European states. Following Austria's lead, nations such as Italy and West Germany signed similar contracts with the Soviet Union in the early 1970s, including Soviet gas into Western Europe's energy mix. By the end of the 1980s, Soviet gas accounted for a sizable amount of Western Europe's energy consumption, with 15% of all gas consumed in France and 30% in Germany coming from the Soviet Union. The 1970s saw a period of détente between the Eastern and Western blocs, resulting in increasing economic cooperation. The development of pipelines, such as the Druzhba pipeline in 1964, and the Urengoy-Pomeroy-Uzhhorod pipeline in the early 1980s, aided the flow of Soviet oil and gas into Western Europe. Despite resistance from the United States, Western European countries pursued energy accords with the Soviet Union to diversify their energy supplies. The Druzhba pipeline, also known as the Friendship Pipeline, commenced operations in 1964 and is still one of the world's longest oil pipelines. It delivers oil from Russia to several European nations, including as Poland, Germany, and Hungary. The Urengoy-Pomeroy-Uzhhorod pipeline, first opened in 1984, is a key natural gas export route from Russia to Europe that passes through Ukraine. Despite U.S. objections, Western European nations tried to diversify their energy supplies by entering into energy deals with the Soviet Union. These alliances highlighted the complicated dynamics of international politics of the time, in which economic pragmatism frequently coexisted with political rivalries. Following the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991, the Russian Federation emerged as an independent state. Russia's economy was in disarray during the 1990s, but commerce with the EU began to grow. The EU has become a key partner for Russia, purchasing energy resources and exporting machinery, autos, and consumer products. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement between the European Union and Russia was signed in 1994 and entered into force in 1997. This agreement established a comprehensive framework for political and economic relations, including trade, investment, and energy cooperation. Throughout the 1990s, the EU became Russia's most important commercial partner, accounting for a sizable portion of its commerce. In 2005, overall commerce between the EU and Russia was more than 166 billion euros, with Russia's trade surplus accounting for around 8% of its GDP, or around 50 billion euros. Russia was the EU's third largest commercial partner, accounting for 7.3% of total commerce, whereas the EU was Russia's most significant trading partner, accounting for 52.9% of total trade. The EU purchased energy resources from Russia, such as oil and natural gas, and exported machinery, automobiles, and consumer products to Russia. This trading partnership helped Russia's economy rebound in the late 1990s and early 2000s, despite the hurdles of transitioning to a market economy. By the early 2000s, the European Union had cemented its position as Russia's main commercial partner. In 2008, the EU accounted for 52.3% of Russia's total international commerce, with energy items, primarily oil and gas, dominating exports to the EU. The EU shipped 105 billion euros in 2008 commodities to Russia, whereas Russia exported 173.2 billion euros, with energy and fuel supplies accounting for 68.2% of Russian exports to the EU. This trading connection was mutually beneficial. The EU obtained a steady supply of energy resources, which is critical for its economic growth, while Russia got access to a large market for its energy exports and purchased machinery, automobiles, and consumer products from the EU. Let us take a little stop. If you've loved the film thus far, might we ask for a tiny favor? Hitting the like button allows us to reach a larger audience, and giving your views or criticism in the comments has an even greater influence. Thank you for watching. Now, let's get back in. 2014 Ukraine conflict and sanctions. The annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 caused a severe deterioration in EU-Russian ties. The EU placed sanctions on a variety of industries, including banking, energy, and defense. In response, Russia imposed counter-sanctions, prohibiting the importation of some EU agricultural items. These policies resulted in a decrease in bilateral commerce. 2015 to 2021, a gradual recovery despite tensions. Despite persistent sanctions, commerce between the EU and Russia has shown indications of improvement. In 2020, the EU was Russia's top trading partner, contributing for 37.3% of overall trade in goods. The EU exported 79 billion euros in commodities to Russia, while Russia imported 95.3 billion euros, with energy items remaining the dominant category. Conflict impacts from 2022 forward. The 2022 Russian confrontation with Ukraine prompted the EU to impose unprecedented sanctions, focusing on vital areas of the Russian economy. Between the second quarters of 2022 and 2024, the EU imposed different import and export restrictions, resulting in a 59% reduction in exports to Russia and an 87% drop in imports from Russia. Let's get back to the current news that broke today. Russia has fully ceased exports to Austria, an EU member. gas prices rose sharply throughout Europe after Austria's OMV announced that Russia will stop delivering gas on Saturday. According to OMV, Gazprom PJSC informed Austria of the entire stoppage of shipments. This move comes after OMV previously announced that it will cease payments to the Russian gas giant in order to collect a €230 million or 242 million USD arbitration verdict. The European gas benchmark contract rose by much to 2.7%, reversing previous dips and hitting its highest level in over a year. The November 16th supply interruption is a critical milestone in Europe's continuous transition away from Russian gas. While many countries in the area have decreased their reliance on Moscow's energy, Austria and a few others continue to rely on gas carried through Ukraine under a transit deal that is slated to expire at the end of the year. The unexpected suspension would force Austria to respond to the loss of Russian gas earlier than envisaged, thereby exacerbating issues in an already tight energy market. European gas prices have climbed by around 30% since late July, owing to higher than usual withdrawals from storage caused by lower temperatures and less wind energy generation. Supply and storage problems. According to data from Ukraine's grid operator, gas flows via the Sudza transit point on the Russian-Ukrainian border are expected to stay constant on Saturday. Russian gas travels from Ukraine to Slovakia before arriving in Austria. Austria's energy regulator, E-Control, said that officials are actively monitoring the situation. Given the high storage levels and the availability of alternate transportation routes, the regulator believes gas supplies for Austrian customers will be safe. Austria relies heavily on Russian energy. The announcement emphasizes Austria's long-standing links to Russian energy. Despite Europe's recent trend away from Russian gas, Austria, Hungary, and Slovakia remain major importers. In 2018, Austria renewed its long-term gas arrangement with Gazprom until 2040. Impact on the energy markets. The supply decrease comes as cooler temperatures and weaker wind energy generation have resulted in greater withdrawals from gas storage. This might leave Europe with fewer reserves later in the winter, when demand usually peaks. Greater storage depletion now will make it more difficult to replace stocks in the summer, driving summer prices higher than next winter's. Conclusion. The future of the EU's gas supply remains uncertain as tensions with Russia escalate. The entire stoppage of Russian gas deliveries to Austria marks a watershed moment in Europe's energy transformation. The expiry of transit agreements through Ukraine at the end of 2024, along with supply decreases, heightens worries about Europe's energy security, especially during the peak winter season. Furthermore, while the EU has shifted to buying liquefied natural gas from alternate suppliers such as the United States and Qatar, this plan is not without obstacles. US LNG has emerged as a key substitute, but reliance on it may impose geopolitical and economic limits. The Trump administration's earlier America First policies emphasized the hazards of relying largely on the United States for essential supplies, including the possibility of trade wars or unilateral policy adjustments that might disrupt energy accords. Furthermore, logistical obstacles, such as the need for additional LNG infrastructure and price volatility in the global LNG market, complicate this move. The EU also confronts difficulties in reconciling its climate aims with energy security. The quick move away from Russian gas has increased reliance on coal and other non-renewable sources, potentially delaying the EU's transition to renewable energy. This energy crisis emphasizes the significance of increasing renewable energy investment and enhancing grid infrastructure in order to reduce dependency on external energy sources. To summarize, the EU must manage a fragile energy landscape characterized by geopolitical tensions, market volatility, and infrastructural restrictions. While the bloc's attempts to diversify energy supplies are admirable, achieving genuine energy independence would need persistent investment, political cooperation, and strategic awareness to avoid being trapped between its suppliers' geopolitical objectives. That's it for this video. Thank you for viewing this video. We appreciate you visiting us today. If our work resonated with you or inspired you, please consider showing your support by liking it and subscribing to keep connected with our community. We greatly appreciate your support. You may watch another video from our channel, which is currently displayed on the screen.